There were a lot of real objects in there. And all the title sequences at the beginning with the rusted metal and the clocks and watches and all that kind of stuff. The heaviest page was one of the title pages, which was done on a sheet of rusted metal which I picked up from a scrapyard and lugged into my car, which just about stood the weight, and is now a little crumpled mess at home because it just fell apart, couldn't stand the weight of it. But I managed to get it to the photographers before it disintegrated. Because Black Orchid was 150 pages, and from page one I decided to do it in a very linear style, very simple style, a very paced storytelling, nothing too flowery or overboard. And I had 150 pages to do, and by page 50 I was bored stiff. So from then on I decided that I've obviously got this wrong, I'm not doing this right. So I left a lot of loose ends and a lot of undecided things. So it was reasonably tightly structured, but I left a lot of things undecided. So when it actually came to the day I was doing that particular page, it was like whatever I fancied doing that day. Generally, I think it's held together reasonably well, but it did allow me to have a little more freedom. And certainly towards the end, I mean, I tend to, some people start at page one, panel one, and work through to the end, and I literally just do whatever panels I feel like doing that day. So, you know, it's a 120-page book, and I'd got about 3/4 of the way through and barely finished any pages, because they were just like in little tattered bits everywhere. So at the very end, what that means is right at the end you have a bunch of panels that you really don't want to do at all. It's like all the dregs that you know, all the panels with 73 people in all doing specific things. But because I'd allowed the loose edges, I did have the energy to do those at the end. It took about 5 months. I didn't start it until DC were absolutely certain that they wanted to do it, because there were a few, you know, hectic conversations to start off with. And then I started slowly, just in case they changed their mind, and then finished at breakneck speed. So it was about 5 months, all in all. The people who've been turning up to the signings have really been across the board. I mean, all ages, you know, a healthy proportion of women, which is nice to see, seeing as though comics have traditionally been for 15-year-old boys. It's nice to see a sort of older audience for this book, and you know, both sexes. I don't know. Hopefully, people who haven't got, who won't just shut down because it's a comic or because it's Batman, even though I can understand the tendency to do that. And hopefully, we'll go with the flow enough to get into some of the more interesting aspects of the book.
Fortunately, it seems to have sold a lot. I mean, it really is difficult to say how much of those sales are due to the fact that it's Batman. I think probably most of them account for the fact that you could put Batman on a beer mat and sell 200,000 copies. But hopefully it's aimed at a more adult audience, and you know, that's really as far as it goes. I can't imagine who's actually buying it.
I like Arkham Asylum because it takes comics to a new level in terms of visual graphics and visual storytelling. It's a dream and it's a nightmare and it's wonderful all around.
The art is incredible. It takes the medium to a new level, where he's not just drawing in panels and stuff. You can almost feel the art. He's got the texture there. He's working with different materials, and it's just beautiful.
My boyfriend reads a lot of comics. I don't necessarily just like Batman, but I read a lot of comics. It was really well done. I enjoyed it.
Hello, my name is Harlan Ellison. I am, in fact, a world-famous author, and I'm here in Toronto at the Comic and Sequential Art Convention to talk and comment on the passing scene and to comment about comic books, which is one of my adorations. And I've been asked to introduce myself, and I think only a fool would say, oh, hi, I'm Harlan. I am really, truly world-famous. You can trust me on this. I would not lie to you. Prolificity and variety of alternate comic books these days range all the way from Paul Chadwick's work at one end to things like the Marvel comic of the Punisher, who is this demented sociopath built like Sylvester Stallone and possibly with the intelligence of a speed bump, who goes around shooting people with machine guns, and kids love this comic.
And in other comic news, on the Punisher War Journal, oh, I'm not sure what's happening on the Punisher War Journal. Let's punch in Dave Ross. Dave was substituting, doing some penciling for the regular penciler who was out of commission for a couple issues. Dave's done all sorts of stuff for DC and Marvel. Dave?
Hi, Rick.
Oh, there you are. I got you now. Dave, what happened with the Punisher War Journal? How many episodes did you do? 2?
Yes, I did 2 issues on the Punisher War Journal. Punisher War Journal is number 14 and 15, in which Punisher gets to go on head-to-head with Spider-Man.
And you finished that? What stage are you at in the artwork?
Well, I'm working on thumbnails right now, Rick.
Okay, wait a minute. He's working on his thumbnails. I thought you were supposed to draw on paper here.
Oh, all right. I'm getting too technical on this one.
Okay.
Thumbnails are thumbnail sketches, and they refer to the small, reduced sketches that we do of the pages to get the work planned out first before we go to full size.
Okay, so these are some of the thumbnails you're doing for Punisher. Now, how big are these? Because I have no sense of scale here.
Well, what I've been doing is I've been putting...
If I did, would I be this loud and obnoxious? How big are those?
All right. Now, just to give you a sense of scale on these sheets, I've got 4 pages, 4 separate sheets from a comic book on one sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper.
So these are really just early... what do? You've done these... look, we've got to backtrack because we're getting lost here. Let's start at the very beginning. How did the comic start here? How did this issue start?
All right. Well, I received a plot from the writer.
And had the writer come up with it himself or with an editor, or how did that work?
Usually the writer and the editor confer, and they get a sense over what will be going on throughout maybe 6 months, 6-month period of time.
Oh, I see. Okay, so they lay out several episodes.
Yes, they work out the basic themes and storylines for about that time period in one sitting. Then the writer goes home and he gets working on the various plots.
Right.
When I receive it usually in a kind of a bare bones plot form, kind of a who goes where and does what.
And is dialogue in at that point, or?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and now that will depend on the writer. Different writers feel comfortable doing different amounts of work in the early stages of the job.
Okay, so with this, you were just given an outline, or was there dialogue included?
Now, with this one in particular, there was spotty dialogue.
Because I don't see any drawn in here, or do you not?
No, I haven't bothered to attempt to draw it in. At that size, on those thumbnails, it'd be pretty small.
Okay, so that goes back to the writer, or to the editor, or both, or?
Now, in this case, I take these thumbnails, and once I get them approved from the editor's office, I go back to work on full-size pages. And what I've been doing recently is I've been able to take these thumbnails and get them blown up in a copy shop to the full size.
Now, when you're drawing a comic book page, are you working on a 8 by 11, or are you working on something larger that is then shrunk down afterwards?
It is larger and it is reduced afterwards. The actual size that most comic book artists work with is 10 inches by 15 inches.
So that's 1.5 times?
Yes.
Okay, so then that is compressed. Now, you've just done the penciling. At that point, it goes where? To the...
It goes to back to the editorial office.
Right.
And the editor will then, depending upon his time, he may actually give it directly to an inker. Now, the inker will go in, and he'll go over all of those black lines that you see with black India ink, using various forms of tools. He will use repeatographs, he will use brushes, he will use nibs, basically anything he can get his hands on that makes a black line.
Okay, we can see here, I mean, there's a dramatic difference between the pencil work and then the inked work.
Yes.
And then it goes back to the editor now, or?
Then it can go back to the editor. Now, it can take that route, or it can take a secondary route, and that is, if the writing is finished and ready to go in, that is the final script, the final dialogue, and all the narration, then what they'll do first is they'll send it to the letterer. So you might even have a stage in the process where you'll have the penciled pages, but you will have in ink on the pages the balloons and the narrative boxes.
Okay.
Then after that has been approved, they'll send it on to the inker.
And then from there it goes to?
Then it goes to the colorist finally.
And then from the colorist to the printer?
To the printer, yes.
Now, from the writer and the editor sitting down to it coming hot off the press and being bound and packed in little boxes to be shipped off to every little comic book store across the continent, how long is that span, generally?